Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Ashleigh Early.
And I'm Kasey Jones.
And we are so excited. We've got Ryan Zadrazil with us today. I had to double check I was pronouncing that right. We learned that this is a Czech, but specifically Bohemian last name, which is super cool. He is an account executive at BetterMynd. And honestly, I got to tell kind of how we met, because in one of our previous episodes, we talked about how to kind of build your sales squad. And that's kind of how we met, because I saw you posting some really fantastic, deeply personal content about the importance of mental health and destigmatizing mental illness on LinkedIn. And I literally hit you up with a message that was like, hi, you don't know me, but I really believe in what you're talking about. And can we please be friends? And you said yes.
Thankfully.
But you know, you're like your account at BetterMynd. You've been super open about your own struggles and figuring things out, and really kind of just talking about that. So I'll open it up a little bit with just telling us a little bit about yourself, and kind of what you're doing, and especially what BetterMynd is doing, because I think it's also a fantastic product as well.
Yeah. So as you said, I'm an account executive at BetterMynd, but more importantly than that, I'm very passionate about both sales and mental health. Both topics are very near and dear to my heart, being in sales for 3 or 4 years now and just going through my own mental health struggles. BetterMynd, we work exclusively with colleges to provide students with online therapy. And the big kicker is it allows them to choose their counselor of choice based on things like gender, race, or even sexual orientation.
That's pretty amazing, because I do feel like, you know, in most colleges, yeah, you get therapy, but you have this like very, very limited selection of the therapists that are available. And it's also usually in kind of a public space. And so you don't, if you are worried about anonymity and those kinds of things, it's a little harder to maintain that. And I'm sure now there's all kinds of additional challenges in terms of getting kind of the mental health support that you need. So it sounds like such a powerful and very needed option.
It was like the perfect storm finding it too, because I knew I was going to get laid off at the job I was at. And it was one of the first jobs I found on Angel Co. And I literally applied, and then I was like, oh, I might as well just send a LinkedIn message to the CEO. And I did it. He responded like an hour or two later, like, let's set up a time to talk. It was a pretty cool experience. And like, I knew I wanted to work there from that point on.
That's so cool. And that, you know, it's always so wonderful when you see that, you know, companies that are in the space, whether it's the mental health space or whether it's anything else that's sort of related, that's like kind of mission and sort of heart driven, we hear all kinds of stories of the company itself not really walking the walk in that way. But it sounds like, you know, the access and sort of the availability of the CEO, that's unique, and that says a lot about the company. So what's it been like? So how long have you been there, and what's it been like working there? What's the experience like?
Just want to backtrack real quick to the talking to Cody, the CEO. When we did our first call, it was the first time I'd opened up about my mental illness, like to someone who's hiring. It was a really different experience, because I felt comfortable and I knew he'd understand, because he could relate, you know, to battling with a mental illness. The experience so far has been really amazing. As I was talking to Ashleigh before I closed my first deal today, so that was exciting, got a win. And it feels like so much more than just like a win for me. It feels like I'm advocating for the students as well and really making a difference.
You're like giving me chills. I think that's so incredible. And that's the thing too. Like, you know, we talk all the time in sales about the power of believing in your product and all of that, but this is on another level. and especially that you've got this like personal connection, but also that you really see this personal difference that you're making. That's a lot more motivating than some of the other products that I know Ashleigh and I both have sold. No knock to those companies, but there's just something really different about doing work that you feel like actually makes a difference.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point, which is you mentioned this, you open this up saying you've got two passions in life. One is advocating for mental illness and another is sales. Those two don't go together very often. They should. We're not talking about it. And I think they're intimately connected, but nobody talks about that. And you've said several times here that, you're very open about your own struggle with mental illness, and the idea of disclosing that and even leading with it in a hiring process is remarkable, is a mild term, I feel like, in the sense that there's a couple things here. Like one, what are the stats? It's like 1 in 5 people in the US has an active mental illness. I think it's actually higher than that. So that means that 1 in 5 sales reps has a mental illness for sure. And I think it's probably higher than that in 2020 because we know mental illness is on the rise. But 2, it's seen to be such a sign of weakness or of unpredictability or unreliability to live with one of these conditions, even though it's kind of ridiculous, because if you know how to manage your own mental health, you're more stable than, I would say, somebody who's never had to battle a mental illness potentially, because there's a level of maturity that comes with that, knowing yourself and getting, doing things to keep your life calm, like locking your dogs in a crate before you record a podcast episode. Apologies to anybody listening to this who can hear my dogs freaking out in the background. And if you're watching the video, it's hysterical. But where did that decision to disclose come from, and how did you have anxiety about that? What was that like?
Yeah, I was on like a webinar for mental health, or not for mental health, for like sales related. And then somebody connected with me and said, oh, I would advocate for you. Like, you're doing yourself a disservice by not sharing your story. So then I started just posting about mental health on LinkedIn. And I spent like a week just really diving deep into the experiences I've had with bipolar disorder and really opening up. And I connected with a lot of really amazing people, both in the sales world and outside of it. And a lot of those relationships to this day, I still communicate with them pretty frequently because we can relate to what we're experiencing, whether it be through sales or our mental health struggles.
That's amazing. There's something so powerful about being willing to put yourself out there in that way. Because, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you do it and the response usually is a whole bunch of DMs of people being like, oh, seriously? I'm going through this, or I'm going through something really similar and I don't talk about it. And there's something about just knowing that you're not alone in that experience. So I'm glad that person encouraged you to talk about it, because I bet you've helped a bunch of people.
It feels that way. I've never seen my mental health as like a weakness person. Well, maybe like a long time ago I did, but I see it more as of a sign of resilience, like my ability to overcome things and survive during some hard times.
Hell yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, you've had experience on other sales teams, obviously. How does BetterMynd, what do they do differently in terms of supporting your team and supporting you as a sales rep, given their kind of experience and their appreciation for mental health?
The perfect example is last week, Wednesday was Veterans Day, and we could have worked. Like, it's usually a university holiday, like people aren't in the office, but Cody, the CEO, he's done this a couple times where it's like, take the afternoon off, take the day off, because he knows that in sales, like, you can very quickly get fatigue or burnout, and he's very aware of that and accommodates that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So kind of along that same lines, it's kind of a unique situation with BetterMynd because it is a mental health platform.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of expect a certain level of awareness and support and stuff like that. How can you, in the interview process, or how have you in the past identified what is a healthy situation for you to be in and what is an unhealthy situation for you to be in? What are the things you look for? What are the things you avoid?
So in this last interview process, I interviewed at a couple other companies, and I knew I had a great conversation with the sales dev manager at one because I was also looking for SDR roles. But then when I talked to the regional vice presidents, I automatically knew like this is not the right fit. Like the way they approached the interview, and it was high pressure and just really questioning if I wanted to be a thought leader or a sales development rep. And I thought that was kind of offensive to a certain extent, but I didn't like push on it. I felt like I should have in the interview.
I hate that feeling where it's like, I know they shouldn't have asked that. I should have pushed back. I should have called out the logic, but then you don't. Like that sucks. And that's such a what is that? I forget the name of the Latin. It's like post hoc ergo proctor hoc or something like that. It's a false equivalency. It's a false equivalency that like you have to pick one or the other. And LinkedIn thought leader is not a career.
Well, and it's really unfortunate because I've been having a lot of conversations, particularly with folks, like younger folks, like earlier in their careers, where they start to get scrutinized by leadership because they're posting on LinkedIn. And there's one person in particular that I mentor who the CEO of his company was like regularly like looked at his page every single day and then would send him messages like, what does this have to do with work? Are you actually working? And it was like this constant kind of feedback loop of intense scrutiny. And it's, I mean, I agree with you. Like when you see that kind of aggressive strategy, I mean, good for you for recognizing, whoa, I don't want to work in this environment. But what do you think it is that is driving this tendency, because you're not the first person that I've heard this from, of viewing a young person kind of building their personal brand and putting themselves out there as some sort of detriment to their work?
So I had a job in 2018, I think it was, and I started posting content in December and then going into the new year. And I got a lot of like, not only from my manager, but from my coworkers. Like they'd make fun of me. Yes, my videos were awkward. I know that. But I felt like they weren't okay with it. Like I was trying to weigh other options based on creating content to like find new opportunities, which I did at one point, but it was also to connect with like some really amazing people and get to know them.
Well, if you video in 2018, you were ahead of the curve. That was like just a baby trend. Like that's a crack. So like 2018 was when video was just like Vidyard, I think was founded in what, 2017, 2016? I mean, that's just barely a new topic. So it's kind of crack. So it's like one of those, you know, the innovators are always mocked sort of things.
Yeah. So what do you think that we can do more as a sales culture to support mental health? Because, you know, and I obviously haven't traveled much this year, but just about a year ago, I traveled to 2 different sales events in 2 wildly different circumstances and places, but within like about a week and a half. And at both of them, people opened up about how they'd had somebody on their team die by suicide. And in both cases, nobody saw it coming. It was a complete and utter shock. And their teams were really, really kind of destroyed by it. And I just remember it being so upsetting for me that it was that prevalent. And I don't know, we're definitely talking about it more, which I think is a great step. But I'm wondering, like, what do you think managers and leadership can do, and even your colleagues can do, to kind of be more aware and better supportive of folks that are dealing with mental health challenges?
It's a really great question. I kind of have a story related to this that I think might help answer the question. I had a sales job eh, that I was working at, and I had made a comment to my manager, and maybe it was a little too informal, like something you'd say to your coworkers, but not your manager. And he calls me into his office and he starts just swearing at me, F this, F that. And I'm like, just so you know, like I just changed medications and they're not functioning properly. Like they're not kicked in yet. And that's why I probably said that. And then he understood right away that he had like probably should have thought about what he was saying to me. And I feel like that's the problem with a lot of like sales organizations. They're so disconnected from the reps. They don't understand like what they're actually going through. Maybe somebody, has issues with their child and they have mental health issues, or they have mental health issues themselves. But I feel like, especially as you get higher up the food chain, the more disconnected the management or like VP or whatever it is from the reps.
That's a very good point. And it's really interesting. I just had a conversation with someone about trauma and about how so much trauma, and I think mental illness is the exact same. So much trauma, mental illness, but also, I have multiple autoimmune diseases. They're all invisible. And so this idea that like we can somehow take a quick glance at someone and know what they're going through, or have any understanding of like the battles that they're fighting internally, or the challenges that they're facing, that's just wrong. It's not fair. It's totally disconnected from reality. And so I do feel like, you're spot on here, that there's this just detachment from teams and from between managers and their employees. What do you think? You luckily had an open enough relationship with that manager that you were mentioning, where you could say, hey, no, this is my medication. But I'm wondering, like, are there things that you would recommend as an individual rep, like of how you talk about this with your colleagues or your manager?
It's a good question. I feel like in order to have like a meaningful conversation, it can't happen like on the sales floor. It's more of a private thing that would happen between the manager and the rep. And even then, like some managers may not get it, but I think a lot of managers will get it if you're willing to open up and share in a professional way.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. In a professional way, there's a way to, with any life situation, illness, mental or otherwise, that you're dealing with, there is a way to inform and educate leadership, your colleagues, whatever else. And there's a way to whine about it. And it can be a hard line to walk, especially if you're dealing with someone who is not familiar with the situation. So it's making sure it's it sounds like you did this instinctively with the situation with this leader, where it was, hey, this thing's going on, my medication's been adjusted, it may not have kicked in yet. That may be why this thing happened, why I behaved this way, why I said this thing. It's not, oh, it's not my fault, my medication has been changed. It's not absolving yourself of responsibility or anything like that. It's just as simple as, this is the context behind what's going on. I've got it under control, just FYI sort of thing. And that's hard and that's scary. And it's really interesting too, because I had two reactions to your story there. One was to get really mad at the boss, because it is never okay to curse someone out. I don't care how stupid what somebody else said. It's never okay to curse someone out in anger. I have no problem telling someone they were being fucking stupid, but it's never okay to raise your voice. It's never okay to just go off on somebody, period. But two, and it sucks that I think this. I hate that I think this. But my first thought is, I'm so glad you had a boss who actually understood. I know far too many people, if you had said that to them, you would have been forced out within 3 months because it would have been, oh, he's unstable. And which is ridiculous and flawed and out of an abundance of ignorance about how the human brain works. But it caught up this thing, if we're thinking about something you can do with it. I think something that I would, now that I thought of during this call, I wonder what you two think, is if you see someone behaving or doing something that is out of norm, ask them if they're okay. Don't assume anything about that behavior. If it's out of the normal pattern for them, give them a chance to react and whatever before we go to whatever it is. Because if you've been working for someone for even a couple weeks and all of a sudden you say something completely out of character, I've snapped at work before. And every single time it was because something was going down. I was stressed, I was tired, something happened out of the norm. And the only reason it wasn't a big issue, one, I never did anything too bad. Usually it was just me being snippy. But two, people would pull me aside and be like, girl, calm down. This is weird for you. So I wonder if there's something there around, if you notice someone behaving abnormally, rather than reacting to the behavior going, are you okay?
Well,
look,
I think this is the same thing of both when we see it in someone else, but also when we see ourselves react really strongly to something that we normally don't, being curious, right? Instead of assuming you know the reason, and instead of like responding quickly, being curious. And I do think that's the other thing that we're not taught as managers, is to ask more questions. You know, instead it's like we're taught to constantly be telling people what they should be doing
and how to deal inspect.
Yeah, and instead, you know, it's like I've learned, it's like if someone comes to you with a problem, usually that's not actually the problem. The problem is like 7 layers deep. And the same thing, if somebody acts out of the norm, it's not what they just said or did. It's something, Ashleigh, to your point, much deeper than that. I'm curious, how do you deal and how do you spot for yourself when you realize, I don't think my medication is working? Like, how do you know how to have that curiosity for yourself and how to manage that you know, journey of being your own kind of self-advocate at work, but also, you know, with the mental health professionals that you work with?
Yeah, so with bipolar, the big thing is sleep. If I'm not sleeping, something's wrong. Like, it's like the big noticeable sign I always find in my personal life.
Interesting.
Is it out of curiosity, because I feel like I have several people in my life who are bipolar, so I'm familiar with the disease progression and stuff like that. I feel like there's a certain amount of education we should do as well, because two things here. One, that's a really good question, Kasey. Two, Ryan, is that usually an indication that you're transitioning between the manic and the depressive, or is it a sign that you're in mania? Because I know one of the hallmarks of mania is a decreased need for sleep. People can get by on, I know someone who was up for 72 hours straight, teaching themselves Morse code when they were in a mania.
Yeah, the last mania, there was no sleep. What happened was I was really stressed out about a job transition, and it got really bad really quickly. Once I stopped sleeping, I start making like a lot of irrational decisions. And if nobody catches it, or if I'm hiding my actions from other people, it's really hard without like going to the hospital to make it, better.
Well, and look, I think you inadvertently brought up another really good point. it's the whole hiding your actions from other people. That's the other big thing is like, no matter what mental health struggles you're dealing with, having a strong support network, it makes all the difference in the world. And that's why I like especially applaud you for being really open about what you go through, because I think now there are people out there that if they saw that they were going through something similar, they know that they could reach out to you and you would support them. And that's, for me going through kind of my trauma 5 months ago, it all came down to like the people that supported me, and I wouldn't have been able to get through it otherwise. And so,
but you were also strong enough and knew yourself well enough to ask for what you needed.
And yes, but it also, I realized that there was a lot of work that I've been doing in the last few years to get to that point.
Yeah.
Going through a really shitty divorce, I think helped me because it forced me to like, I've been in therapy for the last 4 years. And because of that, and it's interesting. I had this conversation with my therapist last week where I said, my instinct was to not tell anybody and to be really quiet about it, but I knew that I needed to. And he was like, he challenged me and he was like, I think your instinct was that you needed it. Your learned behavior was to be quiet about it, but your instinct taught you not to. And I think he is totally right, because we don't talk about hard things in my family, and we definitely don't talk about anything that others might pity us for. And so doing that work for years previously put me in a stronger position to recover. And so I don't know, I'm curious, like when you think about the steps that you've taken, the things that you put into your place, the practices that you put into place to get you to this point where like you really can handle the stuff that you go through, you can be this like beacon of hope to others. What are some of the like practical steps and the practical things that you do either on a regular basis or you've done to get to this point where you're in such a good place?
Yeah, I'm definitely really stable right now, which I'm happy about. Um,
I bet.
I think routine's a big thing, like getting to bed at a reasonable hour, getting up at the same time, doing what I need to do before work so I'm not distracted, and then just continuing to tell myself that I'm in control of my actions and I'm in control of my attitude. And if those are fluctuating or going in the wrong direction, I need to like seek support.
It's amazing. And I think that's very, very helpful advice.
Thank you.
It's,
Yeah.
and I think that's true regardless of your mental health status. That's something I feel like everybody needs to be checking on in one way or another.
Yeah.
It's something that's been kind of percolating in the back of my mind as we've been talking, Ryan, is you're early-ish in what hopefully is a long and glorious sales career. And we know that a significant portion of mental illnesses manifest themselves between 18 and 26, which is the same time most people get their first sales roles, which is incredibly stressful and terrifying and whatever in and of itself. Do you think there is a role for sales leadership to play in this very vulnerable time in people's lives to not just create healthy workplaces, but to also better educate people about themselves as they're figuring this stuff out?
100%. I think like I was saying before, it's not only the sales leaders, but it's having self-awareness, not only of yourself, but everybody around you. I think we have to hold ourselves accountable for our own actions, but we also need to show support and make sure like we check in on people, make sure they're okay if something out of the norm is to happen.
Well, and I think even tying this a little bit to the state of sales survey that we did, one of the things that really struck Kasey and I, and this is to do with discrimination and harassment, but I would be shocked if the numbers aren't similar when it comes to mental health. There's a significant difference between the number of people who experience discrimination and harassment and the number of people that witness discrimination and harassment. I am willing to bet, based off of the numbers we know about mental health, that there are a significantly higher number, and organizations like Uncrush and stuff are doing a lot to help with this. There's a significantly higher number of people who are experiencing some sort of mental illness than are aware or seeing the signs of it in others.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Ryan, if you were to see some signs of mania or depression or, heaven forbid, suicidality in a coworker, how would you respond? Or how would you suggest people respond?
Putting me on the spot.
I know, that's a tough question.
It's not about having the answers to this stuff either. Like, obviously, disclaimer, talk to a mental health professional, talk to your doctors, follow all local laws and stuff like that. This is not medical advice. This is just people who want to do right by their people.
I would probably pull that person aside, like as a rep to a rep, and just see how things are going. Is everything like normal in your life? Well, not that things are ever normal, but I would not see
anymore anyway.
Is it the usual amount of crazy or an abnormal amount of crazy?
Exactly. And I would just have like a candid conversation with them. And if there's HR, I know a lot of startups don't have HR, but maybe HR is a place to go, or again, to the sales leaders, and have like a three-way conversation, just explain what's going on and see what leadership can do about it. Now, leadership may not know what to do about it a lot of times, so I'm not quite positive where to go from there. What do you two think?
I mean, I think you make the best point. It's start talking about it, asking them questions and seeing what kind of help you can provide. And I think it's never going to be an easy thing. And that it might not be what they want to hear, but you'd always rather risk pissing them off than not getting them the support that they need through a really challenging time.
And I think there's, like you guys said, it's asking questions. It's not going to somebody and saying, you're depressed. It's not labeling, I feel like. It's what's going on. Here's what I'm seeing. Can I help? Are you okay? Tell me more about this. And I think we
identify. Oh, sorry, Ashleigh.
You're fine.
I was curious, like, what are your two thoughts on remote work and how we identify when somebody is having this sort of issue? I think that's really important right now. And I'm not quite sure how I would identify the signs just based on Slack messages and weekly Zoom meetings.
And I don't think we can. And that's I think that's the big thing, is I think we need to be having more one-on-one private conversations with our colleagues, with the people that we manage. Because when you're just in a meeting, you won't spot it. Although I can also say, when you notice somebody behaving differently. And so, someone on my team, we wound up kind of changing how we work together because she was reacting more emotionally to things to a variety of things, and her productivity had declined substantially. And it was just really obvious that our business has changed and it was stressing her the F out, and she didn't like it anymore. And it was totally impacting her mental health. And it took us having some hard conversations before we could be really honest about it and figure out a workaround. And so I do think it comes down to having a lot more conversation and noticing this, like we've sort of said as a theme in this conversation, has something changed, and obviously lots and lots and lots has changed this year, but is there something about how they deal with things that seems to have changed?
And I think, I know the number, I know the big alarm bells. So, I mean, and if you I implore you, if you are a manager, to educate yourself about warning signs for suicidality, suicide ideations, mental health breaks and crises. Learn the signs so you can spot them in your team. Please, please, please. I wish that was a part of every manager training ever. I think it should be. It's not, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it yourself. It's not hard. But I know the big red flags are especially for suicidality, which is the most dangerous. I hate to say the most dangerous, but it's like the one that could actually like really literally kill you. People withdrawing, someone who was, again, it's a change, someone who's normally communicative, who drops off, who stops engaging, or who engages much differently. People who have been struggling or who seem like they've been really on edge and then all of a sudden seem really good, because that can be the indication they've made a decision to do something. And so they get some comfort in the decision and then things go away. Just tones of conversations. If you notice somebody's like, it sounds like somebody's saying goodbye. If it sounds like somebody is giving things away suddenly, asking them, are you okay? Asking them point blank, are you? And I've had to have this conversation a couple times, and luckily every time I asked it, I was wrong. And I'm very glad that I was. But the few times I had to ask somebody, I'm seeing these things. I know these are warning signs. Are you suicidal? If the person on the other side says, yes, studies show that somebody just asking those questions is the difference between getting help and potentially losing that person. And luckily, like I said, the couple times I've had to ask that question, I was wrong. Both times, like, nope, I'm not, but thanks for flagging. Maybe I should go take a look at some stuff, or I'll just check in with you more often. The other thing I'll say, I've done this because exactly what she said, Ryan, it's harder to check. It's harder to tell. I work from home. I don't see a lot of people. I am a solopreneur. I now have like a little text thread with 4 or 5 other, brutal honesty, all women who are in a similar boat. And we just check in on each other, just mental health checks. Hey, how y'all doing today? And the one kind of rule of the text thread is everyone's honest. And it's become a running joke because I'm always like, yeah, the usual crazy. It's a lot, but it's being intentional about creating that ring. And I know I've got these women who I'll check in on. It's not a lot. I can handle that. And at the same time, they're checking in on me. Because the world's a little too crazy. It's too easy for someone to slip through the cracks now that we are all over Zoom. So, and there is, and Kasey, you're spot on. There isn't a good way. No one knows how to handle this. And that's why the suicide rate is spiking so terribly this year. It's like the indirect COVID deaths. Yeah, I kind of got on a bit of a rant there, but I'm with it. Kind of, you struck a nerve with me, Ryan. You did from the first time I saw you post on LinkedIn, because it's pathetic, in my opinion, how scared we all are, especially in sales, to acknowledge this stuff and to talk about the fact that we need help sometimes. And that's perfectly normal. And that's not even talking about somebody who's living with something chronic. I can't imagine living with bipolar. I don't have it, but I know enough people to know that that is the level of, I have nothing but respect for somebody who's living with that. And in my mind, it's, and I don't know if this is a false equivalency, and please tell me if you think it is. It's not meant to be insulting or anything. In some ways, I draw a lot of comparisons between bipolar and diabetes. It's a disease, it's chemical, it can be managed if managed properly, and then it has no bearing on your work. If it's nobody's business what's going on inside your body. But at the same time, it's helpful for your boss to understand why you're going to the bathroom a couple times a day, to check levels and whatever else. Or to know that, hey, if I somehow pass out, please go grab this kit that's in my desk so I don't die. Or tell the paramedics that I'm a diabetic. You know, it should be just as easy to tell your boss, hey, I'm bipolar. If you see me behaving weird, please tell me. I manage this, but please tell me so I can make sure that it doesn't affect my work or whatever. But it's not treated the same. And for the life of me, I don't get why.
When I told the boss I had that, I was switching medications, I didn't tell him I had bipolar because I was scared, like what would happen if he found out.
I'm sorry you've had to hide that part of you, and I'm really, really grateful that you've had the guts to be really honest about it and that you found a work environment that lets you honestly be yourself, because it's clear that that helps you, but it's also really obvious that that helps a lot of other people. So, you know, um, I'm grateful that you have been able to do that. And I'm also really grateful that you've come on the show and you're willing to kind of talk about this experience and the things that you have learned.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a really
Yeah.
great conversation, meaningful conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so as we kind of wrap this up, we always finish with our lightning round. So it's just a series of kind of more lighthearted questions. Don't think too hard. Just give us the first thing that comes to mind. So we will kick things off with, what is your morning routine? We've been talking about routine on this one.
So I stop drinking coffee, I eat an apple, and I go on a walk for like 20 minutes. That's my morning routine.
I don't understand how people can quit coffee. Coffee's too integral a part of my morning routine. Respect. All right. Pick one person who's had a significant impact on your career.
One person, I'm sorry if I butcher your last name, Ari, but Army Barmapov. He was such a great help with finding this opportunity with BetterMynd. Like, I can't thank him enough for how much he helped me prepare for interviews and put together 30, 60, 90 plans and all that good stuff.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Okay. What is your pump up song?
Oh, Deep Wounds by Polo G.
Ooh.
That's a new one. Good. Coming soon to the Other Side of Sales playlist on Spotify. What's one thing you wish you'd learned earlier?
Be patient. It's something I still struggle with, but just be patient. Things happen and it doesn't happen overnight all the time.
Don't worry. I think we all struggle with that one.
Just a bit.
What's your favorite sales book?
Favorite sales book? Oh my God. I have a favorite. I know who it's by, Anita Nielsen. Beat the Bots. It's called Beat the Bots by Anita Nielsen. It's a great book.
That's good. That's also a first one for us.
All right. What's one way that someone could have been a better ally to you?
Better ally to me is just understanding, my illness, the ups and downs, and being supportive instead of like just talking at me, telling me what to do.
I will second that one. What's one way you're working to be a better ally to others? We already know this. At least one answer is putting yourself out there. I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention, but
I think being more understanding, especially with my prospects, they're all going through a unique situation right now because of COVID, and I'm going through it too. So it's better to be in it together than me just trying to slam a service down their throat.
I love that. That's
I'm
a
into
very
that.
good one.
We might have to make that into a t-shirt. All right, last question. What's your guilty pleasure after a bad day?
Oh, Ben and Jerry's.
All right, what flavor?
It doesn't matter.
For those of you
just
listening
Ben
to
and
the
Jerry's.
audio, Ryan has like the biggest grin on his face while saying that, and that just warmed my heart.
That is infectious, though. That is an infectious smile, Ryan.
Seriously, thank you so much for this, Ryan. And for those listening, definitely look Ryan up on LinkedIn. His content is amazing, and he's also just a sweetheart. And of course, go to othersideofsales.com and download the State of Sales survey. and learn the info, share it with folks, and yeah, and always connect with us on social. And I don't know.
If you're feeling really nice, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help others find the show. And thank you for sticking through. These are not easy discussions to have. These are not fun discussions to have, but they're important. So if you've listened to the whole thing, thank you for joining us in this journey and trying to have these tough conversations. And Ryan, thank you so much again for joining us. This has been absolutely delightful. Just to make it even easier. So what's the easiest way for people to find you, to get a hold of you, Ryan?
LinkedIn's the best place.
Wow. All right. So find him on LinkedIn, find Other Side of Sales on LinkedIn. Make sure to follow us. And thank you for listening to Another Side of Sales. And we will see you guys next week.